In just 3 years, 2 Boeing 737s have crashed in the United States with no survivors.
Site United 585.
In both cases, the planes were moments from landing.
Flight attendants, please prepare for landing.
And in both cases, the planes were under full power, but the pilots were unable to control their jets. In the crash of United Flight 585, NTSB investigators were unable to find a cause. Now they're searching for clues into the second crash, US Air Flight 427.
As the investigator in charge, I never allowed myself to think this investigation could go undetermined. We kept on pushing and kept on researching. As long as we had things to research, we kept on going.
To find their killer, the NTSB can't afford to rule anything out. From the possibility that a collision with birds brought 427 down, to strange, even bizarre theories.
They looked at electromagnetic interference. They got calls from people saying it might be Russian death rays. They considered everything.
There were a couple of witnesses who gave reports of the aircraft suddenly descending and hovering before it blew up. We discounted those.
But the investigation's primary suspect is the dual servo valve, part of the power control unit that moves the 737's rudder, and a suspect in the crash of United 585. Parker Hannafin made the valve. At its lab in California, investigators look inside the main cavity of the US Air power control unit. Just like in the earlier crash, they find tiny chips of metal floating in the hydraulic fluid. But once again, Parker and Boeing repeat their claim. Filters designed to stop any debris from interfering with the delicate metal slides have done their job. Investigator Greg Phillips wants to be absolutely sure. If the chips were blocking the slides, they would have left tiny scratch marks behind where they rubbed against the metal. But Phillips can't find any.
Another pass. Okay.
Phillips has technicians put the servo valve from Flight 427 through as many tests as he can think of, trying to find a weakness. If he can find one, it could explain why 2 planes were ripped from the sky. But he comes up empty.
That unit passed all its operational tests. There wasn't any indication that it had failed, and it operated within the parameters we expected it to.
Once again, the investigators are forced to shift their focus back to the pilots. By studying the plane's flight data recorder, investigators know that the jet's rudder was deployed fully to one side, what's called rudder hardover.
We were definitely focused on rudder, on hardover rudder, full rudder input for about 20 seconds. It can be caused either by hardware, something unknown in the hardware, or it can be caused by pilot input.
First Officer Chuck Emmett, who was flying 427, did indeed step down hard on his rudder and then held it there while the plane plummeted towards the Earth. It raised a grisly question. Was he trying to fly the plane into the ground?
And looking at this, and being a pilot myself, is like, this doesn't seem like rational behavior.
What the hell is this?
Human performance specialist Malcolm Brenner listens closely for evidence on the cockpit voice recorder.
What the hell? Shoot!
In this case, they had microphones right by their mouths, and you can hear, as well as in real life or better, you can hear breathing sounds.
Yeah, I see the jet stream.
The cockpit recordings indicate that Flight 427's troubles began at the moment it flew through the jet wake of a Delta Airlines 727 that had just passed in front of them.
Both pilots are startled by the wake.
I see the jet stream.
The first officer breaks off at the end of a sentence. I see the jet stream, and there's no more discussion of the jet stream or anything else. They both focus. Something happened here. Captain says, "Sheesh."
It was such a smooth flight that it was the momentary jolt that they just hadn't anticipated. And with that, the pilots got on the controls and immediately, put in a rudder input.
The cockpit recorder even records the thumping sound of the jet stream turbulence as 427 flies through it. As Flight 427 encounters the turbulence, Brenner hears something unusual. First Officer Emmett begins to grunt.
The grunting is unusual. The controls are designed so that pilots don't need to grunt. They're specially designed around human capabilities. So to have someone grunting is typically a sign of emergency.
By matching data from the flight recorder with the crew's voices, Brenner is able to confirm that Emmett's grunts begin a split second after he pushed down on the rudder pedal, and 3 to 4 seconds after the wake turbulence affected Flight 427.
What the? Go hell!
On their own, the cockpit voice recordings prove very little. But it seems clear that the crew weren't trying to crash their plane. Something happened which took them by surprise. They reacted as quickly as they could, but nothing they did seemed to help.
What the hell is this?
It's been almost 2 years since the crash of Flight 427, and the investigation has stalled. Now 2 737s have gone down in startlingly similar ways, and investigators still don't know why.
We were all frustrated as months wore into years. What were we missing?
It definitely took a toll in their personal lives. They worked incredibly long hours. They never stopped thinking about it.
We were going up against an aircraft that had an incredible safety history. It was really everything you could see for 30 years. This has been a great airplane. We were trying to prove that there was something wrong with the straight A student.
It clearly was on his mind. He, at one point, had a nightmare about it where he dreamed that he was in front of a congressional committee that was grilling him on now there had been a third 737 crash, and in Tom's dream, all of the cameras were pointing to him, and a congressman asked, "Why didn't you ground the fleet?"
Unsure of where to look next, and with the trail of evidence getting colder, investigators need a break in the case, and fast.
East wing 517, you're clear for landing.
On June the 9th, 1996, they finally get the break they've been looking for. Captain Brian Bishop is on final approach to Richmond, Virginia, when, without warning, his east wind jet rolls sharply to the right.
We didn't know to what extent, but we knew we had a problem with the rudder. I turned the yoke the opposite direction and stood on the opposite rudder pedal. But the pedal didn't move for me.
For over 30 seconds, the 737 flies in a precarious right bank as Bishop fights to keep it from rolling over. Then suddenly, the unknown forces holding the jet let go, snapping the wings back to horizontal.
In a matter of seconds, it released itself and went back to normal. We had started the checklist. Almost before I could finish the sentence, all of a sudden there was just a wham.
For a second time, the 737 is pushed onto its side. For 30 harrowing seconds, the 737 takes on a life of its own. Then, once again, as quickly as it began, the rollover stops.
After the second time, I looked at the first officer and I said, "Declare an emergency."
Tell the controller we have flight control problems.
As they slow down to land, the risks increase. If a third rollover occurs, they won't have enough airspeed to recover.
I did at some point tell my first officer to look out the window and find a dark spot. It was nighttime and we were looking to avoid a neighborhood or a populated area. And he very calmly responded that, hey, here's a spot over here.
But there is no third rollover. Bishop brings Flight 517 in high and fast and lands safely.
Taxiing in is when I realized my legs were shaking. We got the aircraft to the gate, and I did pick up the PA to make an announcement to try to explain what had just happened to these people. And on picking up their microphone, I realized there was nothing I could say to make this any better. And probably for the first time in a long time, I was at a loss of words. So I simply put the microphone down and let it go at that.
But Bishop won't remain speechless for long. By the next day, the investigation team has arrived in Richmond.
Flight data recorded it was undamaged, an airplane undamaged. We launched to the scene. The airplane literally didn't move, stayed at its location in the airport until we got down there.
There were a lot of FAA, a lot of NTSB, and they all wanted to talk to us very badly.
It gave the NTSB a tremendous break because suddenly they had a 737 that had had a rudder incident that was intact, and they had a pilot who was alive and who could talk about it.
I think they were much happier to have the airplane than me. I think the airplane probably gave them more to research than I ever could.
NTSB investigators quickly determined that what happened on board Eastwind Flight 517 is alarmingly similar to events on Flights 427 and 585. If they can discover why Bishop's 737 rolled over, they may be able to crack two mysterious and fatal accidents.
And when we said, well, what happened? They said, there was something wrong with the rudder pedal. The pedal wouldn't go down. I was standing on the rudder pedal and I couldn't get it to go down. My God.
With Bishop's first-person testimony, investigators immediately zero in on Eastwind's rudder controls. The power control unit is removed, inspected, and then tested again and again. To the frustration of everyone, the unit performs perfectly.
We tested that aircraft as is. It was intact. We went through it completely. We did flight tests with it, and it passed all tests.
After a 5-year hunt for clues, a third mysterious rudder event on a 737, and a live pilot as a witness, Tom Houter still lacks the evidence he needs to crack his case. He decides to push his chief suspect, Flight 427's rudder controls, a little harder.
One fellow mentioned a test they had done in the military of a thermal shock, where if you had the actuator being very cold and put in very hot hydraulic fluid, it would cause it to react in strange ways. So we put together a thermal shock test. And this test was extreme, to say the least.
On August the 26th, 1996, in Valencia, California, NTSB investigators gather to watch the torture test of US Air 427's PCU. After soaking it in dry ice, the PCU is blasted with nitrogen gas to simulate the minus 40-degree temperatures at 10,000 meters. Then it's quickly injected with superheated hydraulic fluid and given the command to start working.
As we were standing there listening to the actuator move left and right, it stopped. And it was not commanded to stop.
It just jammed. Stopped working completely. Take a look.
Systems investigator Greg Phillips now asks that the valve be taken apart and scanned for scratches. They find none.
Look at that. Doesn't leave a trace.
It's a crucial breakthrough to solving an almost perfect crime. Not only have they proven that the valve which controls the rudders can jam, no evidence is left behind. Tom Houter and his team have now found that a small hydraulic valve that controls the rudder of the world's most popular commercial jetliner can jam in the right circumstances. It's an ominous discovery, but incredibly, there's another shocking surprise in store for the investigators. October the 15th, 1996. For the last 5 years, the National Transportation Safety Board has been struggling to crack its toughest case. Two completely separate, but seemingly linked accidents. The crash of United 585 killed 25 passengers and crew. 3 years later, the US Air Flight 427 disaster took another 132 lives. Now, after examining hundreds of clues, investigators have made a surprising discovery. A new test has revealed that under the right circumstances, the hydraulic valve that moves the 737's rudder can jam.
It just jammed.
But the surprises aren't over.
The most important breakthrough came when a Boeing engineer, examining the data from that test, discovered some numbers that indicated the valve at that point had actually reversed.
Whoa.
It's a stunning revelation. Not only can the servo valve jam, but it can then function in reverse. It means that any time a pilot tries to correct a rollover by pushing on the rudder might turn in the opposite direction, causing a fatal accident.
And the reversal is like driving your car. You turn to the right, it goes left. You're not going to figure out this failure mode until you go off the road. And in these cases, that's the pilots were faced with, something so unusual that they didn't understand what was happening.
What the hell is this?
They had evidence now that the valve was unique, that the valve not only could jam, but would reverse.
427, emergency!
That would explain why the first officer, Chuck Emmett, would keep his foot on the rudder pedal, because he's thinking, why isn't the plane going right? And he's feeling the plane go to the left.
To the very end, Chuck Emmett pushes hard, hoping his rudder will help him pull out of his deadly spiral. Tragically, he has no way of knowing that he's steering the aircraft straight into the ground.
Ever driven to Colorado Springs and not gotten sick?
Flight attendants prepare for landing.
Satisfied that they've determined the cause of the crash of US Air 427, the NTSB turns its attention to the unsolved case of United 585.
Another 10-knot gang.
Going back to Colorado Springs, you could follow a progression of what the captain was doing. He's close to the ground, and suddenly, under rudder reversal, he puts in a little bit of pedal. The pedal violently pushes his leg back.
Oh, God! Flip!
15 flap!
15!
Rudder reversal certainly fits what I know about this crew and how it fits.
We were able to show the failure mode. It matched the flight data recorder from each aircraft. It fit like a glove. So we now had a lot more information we could apply to United 585. And based on that, we redid the accident report.
Oh, my God!
From rudder reversal to impact took less than 10 seconds. 585's flight crew had no chance to save their plane or passengers. In the aftermath of the investigation, sweeping changes were made to improve the safety of the 737 and the entire aviation industry. New training protocols were designed to help pilots react to unusual in-flight events. In the 737 fleet, pilots are now trained on how to react to both rudder hardovers and reversals.
The scenario of the US Air 427 accident, if the crew had the information that we have today, I believe they would have landed safely in Pittsburgh that evening.
The FAA also directed Boeing to redesign the rudder's dual servo valve to eliminate the potential for reversal. Boeing spent hundreds of millions of dollars to replace the valves on thousands of 737s around the world.
One thing we don't like at the safety board is to have an undetermined accident, because then we can't make a change to improve safety. So out of US Air 427, United 585, we have a much safer 737 fleet.
It took NTSB tin kickers 10 years to solve the mysterious crashes of flights 585 and 427, the longest investigation in aviation history.
There are still some people in aviation who don't think the NTSB got it right. But I became convinced after talking to many people, pilots, engineers, people at Boeing, and spending a lot of time with the investigators, that they did get it right.
Since the replacement of the 737 servo valves, there hasn't been a similar crash of the most popular, most profitable plane in the world.